Superman 2 began life as a much larger project. In the mid-1970s, producers Alexander and Isla Salkind weren't just trying to make a single Superman movie, but instead they were trying to make two at once. Their idea was to shoot Superman the movie and its sequel simultaneously, a risky move that ballooned the budget and put incredible strain on the production. Director Richard Donner had already shot the majority of Superman 2 while finishing the first film, but the relationship between Donner and the producers deteriorated fast, and by the time Superman hit theaters in 1978, Donner was out. He wouldn't be asked back for the sequel. The key reason for Donner's firing was creative control. Donner clashed with the producers throughout the first film's production, mainly over tone. He saw Superman as a mythic, sincere figure, while the producers were more interested in spectacle and wanted a lighter, faster product. Kind of funny how history kind of repeats itself, you know? After Superman the movie became a box office hit, the producers used their leverage to push him out and hired Richard Lester to complete the sequel. Lester had served as a go-between during the first film's shoot, so he was familiar with the material, but his sensibility was rooted in satire and visual comedy. The tonal divide between the two directors shaped the final film in ways that were impossible to hide. Lester reshot large sections of the movie to receive sole directing credit, replacing or altering Donner's footage with a more ironic, stylized approach. Gene Hackman refused to return for reshoots out of loyalty to Donner, which forced Lester to work around his scenes using body doubles and stand-ins. Margot Kidder's performance also shifted between scenes depending on which director had originally staged them, and the inconsistency present in the film became a defining trait of the theatrical cut, and for years, fans debated what Superman 2 might have looked like had Richard Donner been allowed to finish what he started. Superman 2 also came at a moment when Hollywood was still figuring out what superhero films could be. The first Superman had set a new bar, but there was no roadmap yet. The contrast between Donner's sincerity and Lester's stylization created a version of Superman that never really felt stable from scene to scene. In 2006, after decades of fan campaigning and growing dissatisfaction with the original theatrical cut, Superman 2: The Richard Donner Cut was finally released. It restored Donner's footage and reshaped the story closer to his original intent. But that's a topic for later in the retrospective. For now, it's important to understand that Superman 2 was more than just a sequel, but instead it was a collision. It was a collision of egos, of tonal ideologies, of commercial needs versus artistic intent, and while that collision produced a film that many still consider to be one of the better superhero sequels of that era, the cost was still visible in every single frame. This, unfortunately, wasn't a singular vision. Instead, it was a patchwork held together by performances and just enough magic to keep flying. This is Superman 2. After defeating Lex Luthor, Superman faces a new threat when Kryptonian criminals Zod, Ursa, and Nan escape the Phantom Zone and arrive on Earth. As they begin their takeover, Clark Kent gives up his powers to live with Lois Lane, unaware of the invasion. When Zod seizes the White House, Clark must reclaim his strength and face his origins. Lex sides with the invaders to protect himself. In the final battle at the Fortress of Solitude, Superman tricks the villains into losing their powers while appearing to sacrifice his own. Powerless, they're defeated and cast into the abyss. With Earth safe, Superman reclaims his role, choosing justice over revenge. Superman 2 wastes no time shifting gears from the slower build of its predecessor. With the origin story out of the way, this film opens with the freedom to drop us straight into the middle of the action. The Eiffel Tower sequence is a very strong introduction. It's structured with clarity, paced deliberately, and grounded in a classic comic book rhythm. The setup is simple. A hostage situation with a ticking bomb, a determined Lois Lane, and Superman arriving just in time to save the day. The staging is clean and the energy feels true to the Golden Age spirit. There's an earnest confidence to the way it plays out, and it reestablishes the tone of this version of Superman quickly and efficiently. The moon sequence offers a much different tone, but lands just as well. Zod, Ursa, and Nan don't make a dramatic entrance. They drift silently through space, observing before they act. What follows is a quiet, brutal show of dominance. The moment where Ursa rips the patch off a man's spacesuit and lets the cold vacuum of space kill him doesn't rely on any crazy special effects or overplayed menace. It's cold, curious, and calculated. As the film builds towards its climax, the action becomes less focused. The Metropolis fight between Superman and the Kryptonian trio should feel massive, but it plays awkward and flat. The choreography lacks any structure whatsoever, and each beat resets rather than escalates. Characters fly into signs and crash into buildings, but there's never really any sense of actual danger. The fight doesn't build tension or reveal anything new. Instead of creating momentum, it leans on sight gags and empty destruction. What should be a very dramatic standoff feels like a parody of one. There's no weight to the blows, there's no desperation in the characters, and nothing about it brings the story closer to resolution. It just feels like it's padding out time. The end sequence in the Fortress of Solitude has even less clarity. By this point, the film is unsure of how to resolve the conflict. Instead of strategy or power dynamics, we get gimmicks. The mirror trap is very weirdly staged, and the moment where Superman throws a glowing plastic version of his crest at the villains is one of the strangest missteps in the entire series, which is saying a lot.
What was that? Yeah, take that, you jerk. That was a minor inconvenience.
Both the action and the tone in Superman 2 is incredibly uneven. When grounded in character and clear stakes, the set pieces land, but when the film reaches for spectacle and empty gags without purpose, it loses focus. This is foreshadowing, of course, for Superman 3, which is all gags, no purpose. But we'll get there when we get there. Meanwhile, Margot Kidder gets far more room to shine in Superman 2, and the film is better for it. I barely mentioned her in my retrospective on the first film, but here, she becomes essential to the emotional weight of the story. Kidder plays Lois Lane with the right mix of sharpness and warmth. She isn't just fast-talking and confident, she's observant, determined, and constantly pressing forward even when the people around her try to brush her off. But that energy never really feels performative, instead it feels lived in. She matches Reeve beat for beat, and their chemistry grounds the film. There's something awkward and sincere about the way that they interact. It's romantic without being cheesy. In a movie that juggles intergalactic threats and power fantasies, it's their dynamic that brings things back to Earth. The Snyder Cut, which is the theatrical version, the version that I am primarily reviewing in this video, unfortunately loses one of the strongest scenes between them. In the Donner Cut, Lois confronts Clark, she pulls a gun, shoots him at point-blank range, and waits for a reaction. Clark doesn't flinch, he doesn't get angry, he simply straightens his posture, lifts his head, and quietly transitions from Clark Kent into Superman. You don't get an explosion of power or a dramatic music cue, it's just a shift in presence, and that moment tells you everything you need to know about both characters. Lois acts on instinct, putting everything on the line to find the truth, and Superman responds with understanding, not outrage. He sees her not as reckless, but as brave. That moment, brief as it is, embodies why these characters matter. It's one of the most emotionally honest scenes in the entire franchise, and it's honestly what makes me prefer the Donner Cut over the Snyder Cut. We'll go into why later on, but for now, let's go back to the Snyder Cut. Where that version of the film stumbles hard is with the subplot about Superman giving up his powers. It feels like a narrative detour that's entirely unnecessary from the moment it begins. You already have 3 Kryptonian villains tearing through Earth with unstoppable force. That is enough of a threat. Taking Superman out of the picture for a stretch of the film really doesn't add any weight, it just kind of drains it. There's no real tension in the decision because you know he's just going to get his powers back by the end. Later films, like Spider-Man 2, would explore the burden of responsibility in a way that felt personal and organic, but here, the choice just feels forced. If anything, it's a plotline that's better suited for the third film. Once the world and the stakes have already been developed across 2 entries. I mean, imagine that. If Superman loses his powers for Lois Lane, and then it somehow malfunctions and creates that evil version of Superman, where then Clark Kent has to figure out how to stop him with just his own wits, and we get kind of that interesting character study that the third film tried to do but failed. I don't know. That's just fan fiction at that point. Another lingering issue with Superman 2 comes from how the film handles continuity from the first movie. The trial of Zod, Ursa, and Nan was originally shown at the start of Superman the movie, even though it had no real connection to the film's plot. That decision made the scene feel out of place. If you're only watching the first film, it reads like an unresolved tangent. Superman 2 opens with a condensed version of the same scene, which feels repetitive and awkward. It would have been cleaner to just remove the trial from the first movie entirely and allow it to play out in full here. That way, the story builds momentum from the start and the villain's origin feels properly connected to the rest of the narrative. That's why I kind of prefer the Donner cut more, because having Jor-El guide Superman as opposed to his mother just works better with continuity. Despite those flaws, there's one element of Superman 2 that never falters: Terence Stamp as General Zod. His performance gives the film focus whenever it threatens to unravel. Stamp never plays Zod as a cartoon villain. He walks into every scene as if it already belongs to him. The way he speaks, the way he moves, the way he stares down his opponents carries a gravity that elevates even the silliest material. He doesn't need to scream to be terrifying. He just needs to speak calmly and act with precision. In a film that often feels pulled between tones and priorities, his performance holds steady. It's not an exaggeration to say that he saves entire scenes by giving them a center. In fact, I would argue he saved the movie. He makes Superman 2 as good as it is.
Kneel before Zod.
Don't get me wrong, I don't hate this movie outright. I know I've been kind of negative, but I do think that Superman 2 is a film that is defined by its extremes. The highs work beautifully. The character work between Lois and Clark, the early villain sequences, and Stamp's presence all leave a very strong impression, but the lows are just so frustrating. Plot threads feel so undercooked. Key decisions are handled without purpose. The action, as I mentioned earlier, drifts between strong set pieces and baffling choices. It's not a bad film, but it's a film that carries the weight of behind-the-scenes compromise and doesn't always know how to hold it together. There's a great movie buried in the pieces. Sometimes it breaks through, other times it just slips out of reach. Now, throughout this retrospective, you've probably heard me mention something called the Donner Cut. What is that? Well, the 2006 release of Superman 2: The Richard Donner Cut was the result of a long effort to restore a film that had been taken out of its director's hands. The theatrical version was successful, but fans quickly noticed the tonal shift and uneven structure. As time passed, interest in Donner's unfinished version only grew. When the studio finally gave Donner the opportunity to revisit Superman 2, he didn't return to a finished movie. There was no complete negative, no locked edit, no score. Many of the scenes Donner had planned were never even filmed. Others were buried in storage or mislabeled. Donner had to reconstruct the entire film from a mix of original footage, recovered outtakes, and in a few key cases, screen tests. One example of this is the scene that I mentioned earlier, where Lois confronts Clark about his identity. In the absence of a final version, the film uses footage from Margot Kidder and Christopher Reeve's auditions. It's rough, clearly not intended for release, but it represents the only surviving version of that moment as Donner had conceived it. Another major change was the restoration of Marlon Brando's scenes. The theatrical cut had removed Jor-El entirely due to a rights dispute between the producers and Brando's estate. In the Donner cut, Jor-El plays a central role in Clark's journey, offering his remaining energy to restore Superman's powers. Because in the theatrical release, he just sort of gets his powers back, and it's never really explained how, and the whole dynamic of that just doesn't make any sense. And this sequence not only closes the loop on Jor-El's arc from the first film, but it also adds emotional weight to Clark's decision to return to his responsibilities. Reinstating Brando gave the sequel the same moral foundation that anchored Superman the movie, and it helped to clarify the emotional spine of the story, connecting that opening prologue to this film. The technical work behind the Donner cut was extensive. Visual effects had to be rebuilt from scratch. Music cues had to be reconstructed to match scenes that were never fully scored. Some transitions remain abrupt, and certain moments feel incomplete, but the goal was never to create a flawless final cut. It was about giving shape to a version of the film that had been lost to studio politics and compromise. In my opinion, the Donner cut is the best way to watch Superman 2. I say that as someone who genuinely loves the first film and appreciates how it carefully balanced sincerity, myth, and emotion. The Donner cut carries that same energy forward. It feels like a true continuation, not just in plot, but in spirit. Everything comes together to make the film feel more grounded and complete. It may be rough around the edges, but the heart of it lands in a way that the theatrical version just never really could. And with all of that out of the way, I'm Cole McCormick, you're watching Firewood Media. This is part 2 of my Superman Retrospective series, where I go over every major Superman theatrical film. I've been meaning to cover Superman in depth for a long time on this channel, and with the upcoming release of James Gunn's Superman, I figured now is the perfect time to do so. Stay tuned, because up next I'll be covering Superman 3 from 1983. It's a controversial film. A lot of people really don't like it. Some people really love it. There's a lot of memorable scenes. Frankly, I love it for Richard Pryor and the moment where that woman turns into a horrifying cyborg monster thing. It's going to be a mixed bag. We'll talk about it. Special thanks to our channel members for making videos like these possible. Their names are listed on screen. It's only $1.99 a month. If you want to support videos like these being made, consider becoming a member. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Peace out.